Okay, so this is my review of I Know This Much Is True, Episode 3, directed by Derek Cianfrance and written by Derek Cianfrance. So this episode, what the show's been doing so far, is opening with flashbacks, and this one we learn about the character of Penny Ann Drinkwater. Now, Penny Ann Dominick didn't treat so well when they were kids, and it's something that's important because it shows that Thomas knew this, and Thomas looked down at him for doing this towards Penny Ann. It kind of puts a little bit of a darker side on Dominick. He's not clearly this innocent person who's just done good in his life. He's had his mess ups too. It's interesting that Penny Ann's brother is Ralph, the janitor at Hatch, and that Dominick mentions they're the only other twins that were in the school. But the difference here is that Penny, because of Dominick, got suspended for 3 days because Dominick made up that she stole Oreos. So it's just a bad move on his part. And now you could see Ralph resents him, and Thomas at the time was upset at Dominick too. So it adds a little mystery here too at what exactly happened with Penny Ann, because she got suspended for 3 days and then never returned to school. So this led to her disappearance. So we wonder how that relates to Dominick and Ralph and the resentment Ralph still has towards him, clearly when we see them in Hatch together, which we'll get to. So we see now in current time with Lisa, aka Rosie O'Donnell. She's had a change of heart and now is seeing Dominick's side where, okay, Thomas really shouldn't be at Hatch. She mentions that the review board has already scheduled a hearing on Thomas's behalf for the upcoming Wednesday, which is actually Halloween. And she suggests to Dominick to calm down, that he can't go in super hot, and that they got to write a script here that's just proving that Thomas is a good person and that this one incident doesn't define him. Now, from this information, I'm going to take a guess. I haven't read the book, but I'm going to take a guess that basically this narration we've been hearing in the show so far is the letter that Dominick is writing, and it's about Thomas. And you see little hints at that too, because just the opening narration in this episode where he mentions that Thomas had a way of looking at him when he would do wrong, and it's kind of maybe him using some of his faults to highlight all the good Thomas brought to his life. That's where I think it's going. We'll see though. So you see, as I was bringing up before, that Dominick runs into Ralph, who is the janitor at Hatch, and he wants to give him his number to let him know if anything happens to Thomas there, to be in touch with him. Ralph is not receptive to this, but he does let him know that Thomas is outside. I'm thinking that Ralph was doing that in Thomas's behalf because he does like Thomas, and that Dominick at least takes what he can get from Ralph. And it's hard to watch seeing Thomas picked on by this guy. He says it's like John Wayne with the cowboy hat. Just adding to stuff in the show that's just not easy to just take in. And like I've always said, it's so hard for me to watch bullying of any sort on screen. It's just like, whew. But this Ralph story is interesting because we don't know the full story yet and what happened in the aftermath of Penny disappearing. Okay, so this is where things take a different turn here, where we actually go to the first time we see that when Dominick and Thomas are more grown up now, they're going to college. Ma buys them a typewriter. The reason she really bought this typewriter for them was it was a safety net to prevent them from going to Vietnam and to go more the path of college. And you see that Dominick from the start is telling Thomas, like, look, we can be in the same building. I don't really want to have the same dorm room. That's not going to fly with Thomas, obviously. And he makes it that it's about the typewriter, but it's really about him wanting to be with Dominick. But you see that throughout this episode, Thomas really struggled with this college thing and wasn't getting out of bed, wasn't doing his work. Dominick was doing his papers for him. And it's just showing you more sacrifices he made for Thomas, but how much he really does love Thomas, and that he was willing to do that throughout, even in a time that's usually supposed to be just mostly exciting and freeing for people in college. And the casting department really just shines here, how they casted Leo, Dessa, and of course the twins, being Philip Ettinger playing Thomas and Dominick. And what's really good about all these people who play the younger versions is that they don't just get the look down of all the characters, but it's the demeanor they portray and the pacing, the rhythm of their dialogue, which is just crazy. It was really well done, and that goes from Leo to Dessa all the way to Dominick, and especially as Thomas. Like, they all nailed it here. I was really impressed by that. It just feels like they put that extra effort, because sometimes in shows you see them go back in time to show a younger version, and they kind of half do it where they look like them, but they're not really behaving like them. They really went all out, especially physically. So when we see how Dessa and Dom met at this club, and he's defending her and sticking up for her, and then they talk in the parking lot, this is where it dragged a little bit here. I was starting to fall asleep a bit. I think this was the longest episode in 59 minutes, but I feel like it could have been a little tighter. I feel like there was a lot of demand of paying attention to certain scenes in this flashback portion that kind of could have just been maybe a minute or two shorter. So where we get a nice stretch in this episode, though, is when we see Thomas is in bed asking Dominick about sex and what it's like. But it leads to the point of Thomas was actually, at this point in his life, caring about Dominick's well-being, was worried about him, wanted him to be safe. And this transitions beautifully to Dominick in current time talking to Dr. Patel about how, as time went on, that was less and less with Thomas. And he was still there at that point, but he started just going away in his head. So in this scene with Dr. Patel, I think Ruffalo, obviously in past episodes, locked up his Emmy nomination, but I think this is already giving him high odds to just win this thing, particularly when he's talking about his wedding day, how in his tux he went over to see Thomas because he was too sick to go to the wedding, and that he was already gone by the time he saw Thomas. He was a different person, but that he did get a rise out of Thomas when he told him about him being an uncle and the baby Angela. But we learned that he never got to meet Angela, and the day the baby died was the day they were going to bring her to see Thomas. So this is just brutal. It's heartbreaking, and Mark Ruffalo absolutely delivers here. He doesn't hold anything back. It's just believable acting to a core, and you know he's there in that moment, and it just translates to us as the audience to really feel it. So I really like they had like a mini twist here in the episode I did not see coming, and they kind of tricked you where he gets a voicemail at home for Joy, and it's funny to see that, oh yeah, in the 90s there is drama with just these shared voicemail machines where you'd hear stuff you probably shouldn't hear, that test results have come in, and then he goes outside, finds a pregnancy test, and we're thinking here like, oh man, he's like in shock because he's gonna have another baby. But it really is, though, that he's just learning she is cheating on him. It's not his kid. There's no way, because of what we learn at the end of this episode, which we'll get to. So there's always in a show like this much needed comic relief, and that comes in the form of Rob Huebel, aka Leo. I love this scene where he's playing racquetball with Dominick, and he's like, look man, I'm not in my top game, I got a lot on my mind. It's just funny for him to say that to someone like Dominick, who's going through so much. Sidebar, I interviewed Rob Huebel this week. Please make sure to check out the interview after this review. We talk all about the show so far and his character of Leo. It's a really funny interview, and I think you'll really like it, so make sure to click on the link in the description down below. So adding to just tough scenes to watch is when we see Dominick and Thomas and Lisa. They're all together in this room, and Thomas talking about just being raped in this place. You don't know if it's totally true, if he's exaggerating a bit, but who knows? Either way, it's really hard and sad, and you feel for Thomas and Dominick here, and they have a great moment when they hug, and Dominick saying he's going to get him out of there. And it's interesting other side of the storyline too, where Settle's closing from taking patients now. So if he does get released, he needs to go somewhere, and Dominick says he'll take him on 24/7, but Lisa's like, are you sure about that? And after you see him, are you still going to feel that way? So that's interestingly setting up to how that might end, and where he might have to let go of Thomas a little bit. He's too clutching on him that it's affecting his own life way too much. And it's sad him talking about that he wants this water from the river, not for the infection for his wrist, as Dominick thinks, but it's for his brain. So it's just his self-awareness too of how sick he is in the head at the moment. And it also brings up this little mystery too, back to the grandfather story, where he's like, why isn't grandma buried next to grandfather? So I saw comments, and I feel kind of like an idiot, where there's good points where people have the theory that the grandfather is actually the dad and that he molested their mother. I think that makes sense because we don't see any pictures of the father, or that's why the mom would never mention the dad in any case, even near death. But please, no book spoilers down below, just talking theory here. And the biggest problem for Thomas here that's going to be with the review board is him spouting the Bible stuff. This is not what they're going to want to hear, and Dominick's making a point of that he has to just act like he regrets cutting his hand. But that's such a hard sell to someone like Thomas, who's so passionate about his beliefs. And unfortunately, that's probably the only way he's going to get out. And again, really, the MVP this episode is Philip Ettinger, especially as he plays Thomas, because when we go back in time and Thomas is crying in his bed that he didn't get his paper done and that he broke the typewriter case, it's really just some incredible crying done by Philip Ettinger, and him just playing again like Mark Ruffalo is with another acting double really well. And it's got to be so challenging. They're not acting with the performance we're seeing on the other side. And you're really seeing now Thomas just getting sicker and sicker here, and his hands are shaking. And this is where it's difficult for Dominick, because he's angry at him because he broke the typewriter case. He's not getting out of bed, but he's also scared for him. And he says he's more scared even by just the paper he wrote. So this is really showing you when Thomas went to college, like his brain was just fully going the other way now. So now we see where this episode closes out is that Dominick is at dinner with his girlfriend Joy. She gives the news and confirms she is officially pregnant. And what makes Joy not very likable too is what pisses off Dominick is that when he's talking about some very serious stuff with his brother, she just keeps asking how's the chicken she made. She could give two craps about Thomas and wants all the attention from Dominick. And sure, Dominick's not good at giving to her needs. That's true. But in this case, it's hard to side with Joy. And then it makes it even harder to side with her knowing that now she is cheating on him and that she's not mentioning that to him even when she's saying they're pregnant, because he just calls her out and says, am I even the father? He knows what's really the truth here. And he goes and lays down and then he snaps and hears Mischief Night kids outside. So that makes me wonder if we're going to already be at the hearing next episode, which would be great. I think that'd be super interesting because it's the night before Halloween. But here's the curveball is that he drives over to Dessa's place because he's so now just probably done with Joy. And he's missing his ex-wife. He's clearly not over. You hear the song, the first cut is the deepest, meaning his first true love here breaking his heart when they break up and how painful that can be, more than any love you'll ever find. And him driving drunk, he's swerving in the road. He's thinking about this flashback with her when she got back from her trip. And that's also part of the twist is that they set it up originally like maybe they separated because they were just distancing and he wasn't opening up to her. But the real root of it was they were getting along much better when she got back. And when he revealed to her after they had sex, he busts really quick. And she's like, well, I'm scared. Because she's not ready to be pregnant yet after this. But he's like, oh, you don't got to be scared. Like, I took action and I got snipped. You got a vasectomy. So it's an extreme measure he took without consulting her. And that's clearly the root of this divorce. And it's something he deeply regrets. And he's drunk and he drives into a tree. This is clearly a big moment at the end of this episode. But just how I felt watching it, this was my least favorite of the three so far. It was still very good. But I think it needs to pick up the pace a little bit now. I know it's only 6 episodes. I know there's a lot of character development here, but you always hear people say about certain shows like, oh, this show's good, it's a character study. But as someone who reviews so many shows and movies, I always look at it as like, I want everything now. I want the best it could possibly be. And that requires a little more interesting in the plot. And maybe I'd prefer if they added a little spice to the novel story here, because when you're translating from a book, it doesn't always maybe feel the same way as you read it on screen. And I feel like something here was just bland. And that has nothing to do with acting at all or how it looks cinematography-wise or the music's still kicking butt. But I think it could have been a little shorter, a little tighter, and a little more interesting in some ways. So it's a lot just to invest in one character, and you also want to expect a little more interest and more entertainment as well. It's still television, is still a show, so we'll see, but I'm still thought it was very good. I'm going to give it an 8.6. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this in particular. Let me know if you thought this was the weakest one, or maybe you thought it was the best one. I'd love to hear any thoughts you have. I read every comment, try to respond to as many as I can. Please make sure to check out my interview with Rob Huebel. It's linked right above. And also check out, I interviewed Wally Lamb, the author of I Know This Much Is True, and Juliette Lewis, who plays Nedra Frank. I really appreciate any support I can get. So please, please, please subscribe. It really helps me so much. And please follow me at SteveVarley1 on Twitter and Instagram for more of me. And I'll see you next time.